All right, sorry, folks. There was a glitch in the matrix. We're returning from the first part of the episode. Um, and to start the second half, we're going to go into our favorite philosophers, or philosophy, and why. I'll let Chad open this up. Favorite philosopher, Chad?
Pythagoras is my favorite Western philosopher. For a lot of reasons, he was pretty much the premier philosopher before what we consider Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, these guys. Um, he laid a lot of the groundwork for a lot of the later philosophers. He wasn't the first by any means, I would say, but he was what a lot of the later philosophers personified in their own philosophy, and used a lot of what he had, you know, come up with. I wouldn't say created because he traveled a lot. He went to the Middle East. He went as far as northern India. He went to Egypt and brought a lot of things back to Greece. When we look at philosophy, and we look at Western philosophy, specifically the Greeks, we think of Pythagoras. We know him as being a premier philosopher. Even though we think of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle first, we always include in there, I think, nowadays, because we know more about him, Pythagoras. Even though he didn't leave any written information of himself, but neither did Socrates. So, but what we know of Pythagoras specifically is that from what we know of the people around him that grew up with him, he was a fair person. People liked him. He was considered beautiful, fair to look at. He was also very just, and he personified a lot of the virtues that we consider in Greek philosophy. Um, so he personified the virtuous man. But his specific accomplishments, I think, the one that was most profound was the theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And this was the theorem that is still used today to basically um, differentiate ratios. Some of the other things he did, he used the Greek language and combined it with what we call the base root of numbers, which what some people call numerology or whatever, but what they called it was base root numbers. This is what a lot of mathematicians did in the Greek world was they would break down large numbers into base roots. The Pythagoreans believed, it's not totally certain whether or not Pythagoras taught this, but the Pythagoreans believed that all things were numbered, everything. And so equating the language itself to number was a way for them to express number in language. And it was a pretty profound expression, really. I don't think it had ever been done before. I don't know of any examples before this that had actually expressed numbers in language, as far as the alphabet, that we call the alphabet, had been expressed this way. Um, it could be very likely that it had always been expressed this way, but at least with Pythagoras, this was something that he had purported to do, and what we know of numerology comes from him. His idea of communalism, I think, is something that really resonates today because it's a very fascinating idea. Um, Communalism is something like, especially in our own, native Nevada County, it's a huge system. I mean, there's a lot of people here that believe in communalism. And I myself believe that communalism is a great idea. I think it exists. I think it's something that people honestly, on a very natural um, basis, need. It's like family, right? So Pythagoras is believed to be one of the major, he was one of the people who really brought this forward in the Western world. And this is a pretty profound idea because it's much different than what we consider the Greeks for, which was liberty. Moan labe. The Spartans. Come and take it. From the Persians. This is an idea of like, yeah, well, you can try to, dwell over me, but I will not allow it, kind of a thing. So we get a lot of libertine ideas from the Greeks, but not so much communalism. But this is right out of Pythagoras, and I think it should be distinguished from the idea of communism because I think communism is a much greater idea. There's a lot of complications with that, but if you're looking at just Pythagoras and what he wanted, this sort of utopian idea of communalism, I think it works. I do, because it's more of like a village system, right? People coming together, they share things. They don't own stuff. They're agreeing to be in this space. They're agreeing to put their energy into that space, and they're agreeing to bring things into it to allow that space to exist. Was a profound idea, and Pythagoras really realized that idea after like many years of his life. He went to the Middle East. He went to northern India. He made his way to Egypt, lived there for many years. War developed there, and he was forced to leave to Croton, which is in southern Italy, in a place in Calabria, which is still called Croton to this day. And that is where he developed his Pythagorean society. And the Pythagoreans really came out of this area. And this whole communal idea, which is ironic, developed out of there, but was also suppressed by the local city-states. I mean, you can call them city-states, but they're pretty small. These were like local villages or mass populations in small areas, that were very much for, liberty and possessions and free speech and all this sort of stuff. But they thought that this concept, because the community had grown so large, was a threat, and eventually attacked the Pythagoreans.
One thing I wanted to ask about this Pythagoras, who I respect too, but previously you kind of stated him as a communist, and this time you said communalist. And I know I know that you go to the liberty side over communism in philosophy when you're talking to me, but what's the difference, and why in this do you see communism as maybe some of its better aspects?
Primarily because even Pythagoras, according to the Pythagoreans, saw it as a small community. It was not. It was never meant to be in a large concept like we would consider communism, which is a state-wide, large state, city-states included, system. And he believed in creating small systems as a utopian kind of a concept. And communalism is different between communism because communism is based on a state-sponsored system, whereas communalism is completely and totally owned by the people themselves who are supporting it.
Which was supposed to be the idea of communism.
Supposed to be.
It's like a democratic communism kind of concept.
In that
Everybody
sense,
has a
yeah.
say.
Which is kind of ironic that you bring that up because, what Pythagoras was doing was he was taking what was wrong with democracy and trying to create a utopia with what was basically a fracture of the democratic idea. Because he came from Samos and Polycrates, who was the tyrant of Samos, who was under a supposed democracy, which is the majority rules, right? And so he wanted to create a system that was independent of a tyrant, but still retained a lot of the democratic ideals. And that's where you get the communalism. And from communalism eventually produced communism.
Well, I can understand everything evolving. It was a smaller world back then, and any type of government, be it a monarchy to democracy to communism, anarchy, even. It's easier with a smaller group. They all look better under a better light in a smaller group of people.
Absolutely,
and work easier.
Republics,
Where
everything, yeah.
Communism, you could even argue capitalism has gotten too big in a certain sense. Of course, those things work. Everything's a little bit easier in a smaller group.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely see that point.
Anytime you have big government involved, you have a what you consider a federalized system, which is a great overseeing concept over a governmental system that governs everything that governs is a bad idea. You know, I mean, really. In a lot of ways, communism, socialism, all these things should essentially work.
But it gets so big that you know, I mean, the bureaucracy of it, and there's so many people involved. I guess eventually corruption. Corruption plays a role in even small stuff.
It does.
But if it's corruption on a small scale, it may not affect things that big.
Not big.
But eventually it gets to a point where corruption is so insidious that nobody even knows that it's there.
Yeah.
And that's the risk
That's
for
the
any political.
Yeah. Even Thomas Jefferson talked a lot about this, that any system that's created, the seed of corruption is planted.
Right.
And this is true with every governmental system. He wasn't just talking about the republic or democracy. He was talking about every governmental system, every system that exists. Anytime we choose to govern, these ideas of corruption are planted. And the bigger it gets, the more complicated, the more corrupt the system is. And that's where we're at today.
Yeah, this is definitely a problem with institutions in general.
Yeah, I think Henry David Thoreau said that all institutions should be designed with a self-destructive element in them to finally close themselves.
Yeah. Even Thomas Jefferson said that a government should always, you know, be broken down and overthrown every 4 years.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to throw that little tangent into your great Pythagorean rant. Now on to Joe. Philosopher or maybe inspiration in your case?
So I don't really think a lot about philosophers. I mean, I've read some books on various ones, but I guess the one that sticks out of my mind the most is the Peace Pilgrim. She was a woman that sometime around the Vietnam era, she decided to just go off and seek enlightenment. And she had a visitation of which she described as the image of Jesus coming to her, and basically spelled life all out for her, and she attained what Buddhists or people that are into meditation would define as a peak experience. And
was she Vietnamese?
No, she was American.
No, she was.
And she ended up, yeah, she was a white American girl.
Wow.
I found her name actually, Mildred Lisette Norman.
Oh yeah, see, because she went by, she didn't even care about her name.
Yeah,
and Peace Pilgrim was given to her by people that saw her and knew about her. And so one woman actually made her an apron that said Peace Pilgrim on it and gave it to her, and she wore it. And she basically walked back and forth across the continental United States and occasionally would hitchhike. But ultimately, her whole idea was God has it figured out for you. Just take the step, take the plunge. Everything happens for a reason. And she walked preaching peace wherever she went. And there's a book about her that I really liked. Some of the things that she said I thought were really poignant was whenever you see a battle between good and evil, it's really a battle between two forces of evil because good does not fight.
Right.
And other things that I really liked, I remember she told this story about how she was walking and people would come out of their house and tell her, oh, well, as a good Christian, I want to warn you, don't go to that bar down the street because it's a den of evil kind of thing. And she was thinking to herself, well, you could have taken me in. I mean, I'm just walking. And so instead of taking me in, you warned me about evil down the path. And in that situation, she went to this bar, and they were amazing people that took her in, let her stay there the night. She spent time with all these people and had a great experience. And it's just an example that what you label is not necessarily the truth, just
Right.
because you call it something.
Mhm.
And so for me, the Peace Pilgrim represented this idea of being open-minded and um, just focusing on the positive. Another story she told that I really liked was she was walking through a snowstorm, and she literally thought she was going to die that night because there was nothing. And as she went under a bridge overpass, she found a box, just a big box that she could crawl into. And she stayed there and she survived the night. And it was just, she explained it as another example of God's watching out for you, and just step and you'll find some sort of salvation.
I hope everybody enjoyed the Wordswise. Please give us a listen. We're rough at this, but we hope we have things to say of interest to any ilk and any line down the road. Thank you.